Awesome, thank you. I'm really excited to announce that the City of Atlanta now does have water pressure, and apparently we have some insiders who said that it was no big deal. They've solved that, so hopefully all of our schools will not be calling us to come pick up children. And we had planned for this morning to stop, 35 minutes before we did, and then break up and do these breakout groups, but don't have that kind of time anymore. But luckily we do have somewhat of a small group, and so what we'd like to do is get more audience participation, because we want this to be a conversation. And here, I think Elaine did an awesome job, because at the end, Elaine said, look, what I want to hear about is let's talk about maternity leave and what's happening for women who have to juggle these roles. We've talked a lot about the issues that maybe speak to us, but as you've sat here this morning, is there a topic that anybody wants to, Kim?
In a way that's maybe more tactical. That's saying it's not just a diverse firm, but it's like, maybe I'm going to bring on a one-person firm with a larger firm and say, y'all work together. Make it work so that the smaller firm has the ability to grow and scale too, so that they can now, we can get that experience we need, plus have the access that we need, and get those relationships that are outside of our one or two person, 5-person offices, because we're not really large.
And if I could just repeat the question just for the video, and Kim, I may be paraphrasing this wrong, so bear with me, but the question is, how can these awesome people that we have on the panel who are really in this corporate position, how can they bridge the gap and reach out to people who don't have that benefit of that corporate sort of system and a clear path for success? How do we help those women and people succeed? Yes?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I alluded to that. I'm not the general counsel of my organization. I will be a general counsel one day, and that's when I can affect the most change. In the absence of that opportunity right now, so there's an organization called the National Association of Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms, NAMWOLF. I've begun doing some work with NAMWOLF, and there are potential opportunities that will come down that will speak to exactly what you're talking about. Allowing larger firms to potentially become associated in some way with that organization that then puts in place a program that allows for that partnership. But it really is the decision makers at larger law firm, at corporate legal departments, selling the benefit of using smaller organizations, which are traditionally more diverse organizations. And that is, I think someone used the example of kind of like turning around an aircraft ship. I mean, this has been headed down this path long before I started practicing, long before you started practicing, long before
even me.
EFJ started practicing. And so, it's institutionalized. The stakeholders that we support in these corporate legal departments are just predisposed that I need a King and Spalding, and no disrespect to any of individuals that may be associated with the firms that I'm going to name, but Jones Day, King and Spalding, all of your large law firms that are typically the go-to firms for kind of bet the business work and bet the business litigation. And so it takes me having a conversation with my boss, her having a conversation with her boss, who's our general counsel. You know what, I understand that these are the firms that we generally go to, but have you considered this? Have you considered this? This being a minority or a women-owned law firm. And let me not just suggest to you that you hire that firm, but let me tell you why. This particular expertise they have in this area, the prior experience that they have in this area. And I'm not going to suggest to you that it's going to change overnight, but kind of the conversation that we had earlier about people being in, and I can only speak for corporate legal departments because that's the environment that I'm in, but people, specifically women and minorities, being in these organizations, being an advocate, if you will, for the principle, for the idea of looking beyond your standard kind of go-to firms, for firms like yours, for firms like DOTS, and just kind of being that person that's in the ear of the individuals that are making the decisions. Like I said, I mean, I've been at my company for going on 7 years now, and I'm not necessarily in a position to make those decisions. But I think that's the first piece of it. And then you forging, and other women-owned law firms forging relationships with those lawyers. You may not be able to get a meeting with Juliet Pryor, our general counsel. You can get a meeting with me. You can get a meeting with my peers, trying to be certain we are aware of the services that you provide, your expertise, what you bring to bear, and what makes you an ideal candidate, not just ideal, but the best candidate to get your name in the mix, notwithstanding the fact you don't have this huge kind of structure around you the way that a Jones Day and a large firm is, because that's part of their concern. Okay, if we go with a smaller firm, do they have the structure around it to support this particular business? Which then, to your point, if they don't have that structure, let's partner them with that larger firm such that so that we get the diversity and the benefit of the diversity of perspective and the structure and the resources of a larger firm. But that is, in my opinion, at least that's what I've been told when I'm in there advocating for a smaller minority women-owned law firm. Well, that's great, and I understand they have that experience, but this is a bet the business litigation matter. This is a bet the business transaction. They don't have the bandwidth, if you will. They don't have the structure and the resources to support it. Not suggesting that that's okay, but that is generally the pushback that I've gotten in the time that I've been there.
I would also say one of the ways you market that, and I saw this at Coke, everybody in this town knows that Coke and King and Spalding were together forever, for years. They were our almost only outside counsel. And it wasn't until, it certainly was the case when I started there in 1990. But that started to change, and one of the reasons it started to change was because on the things that weren't bet the business, why would we pay, and listen, no disrespect to King and Spalding and other big firms. Some of my very dearest friends are at King and Spalding, and friendships made through working together for many years. But it does not make financial sense to pay $1,000 an hour for somebody when you can get the same or similar expertise for what you need on a particular matter for $200 an hour. And so some of it is marketing, right? Here's what we bring to you. But you have to get your foot in the door, which goes back to that networking. You know somebody like Tori, if I were still there, you'd know somebody like me. You go to these things, and then you afterward pick up the phone and you say, hey, listen, I was at that panel discussion, remember? And I'd really like to spend 30 minutes with you to talk about what my firm does and ideas you might have about how I can get business with you and with other companies, and are there other people you can introduce me to, right? Networking. You're doing the right thing by being here in the first place. But you gotta do the next step, which is, call Tori.
Don't say that. But no, you absolutely can call me. Everybody knows I'm the first one to give my phone number out, and I just chatted with Sarah. I'm like, you will probably have to email me a couple of times, and it's not a matter of disrespect. It's just a matter that I've kind of taken on some additional roles and I've gotten really busy. But the flip side is, if I don't have an opportunity for you and I've convinced and I recall meeting you in February, well, you know what, let me introduce you to Kenya Thacker-Pierre. She is the general counsel of a smaller organization that might have that opportunity for you now that perhaps I wouldn't be able to present to you or have for you until I'm in a position of more influence. Let me just say it. I have limited influence in the large organization that's a $25 billion organization. As a 15th year lawyer and senior counsel, I don't have as much influence, but I can introduce you to people that do.
Right. And even I can still do that.
Cheryl.
So I'm curious, and I'm going way back to the very beginning, because I am a litigator and I practice primarily in motorsports. I'm surprised that the more seasoned male attorney was surprised by what the woman lawyer was saying, not to call out the judge. And I'm curious about all of your position on this, because that's something I would never do, is call out a judge, even if it happened 5,000 times, because these are, federal judges are there for life, and practicing for my entire career, so you suck things up to succeed. So I'm curious what the panel's position. And by the way, I have to tell you that I was really pleased to hear what Judge Lopez said about he's calling out the judges at the state board meetings, because I'm not in a position even now as an owner of my own firm, litigating employment cases every day, to call these judges out who do this pretty routinely. So.
I'm not a panelist, but I might jump in. There is a difference between state court and federal court. So let's put that aside. But I also think that in part, this is what that's about, is making those conversations more accessible. We wouldn't talk to a judge like that because we think that it's socially, obviously in courtroom, I think we can all agree we wouldn't call out a judge because we have
they
clients.
Can put us in jail.
Jail, clients. But there are ways to do it. And what the problem is, we don't see people doing it, so we don't have that model. Kevin Mooney, I'm going to shout out to him, one of our two male, thank you also Anthony for coming. That's another question we can ask about, where are the men? But Kevin had this great instance, and I won't go into the specifics, but there was a judge in Gwinnett who's doing something, it wasn't actually gender related or bias related, but the judge was making a huge mistake about, I can't remember what it was, Kevin, it was about sentencing. There was something that was really problematic. He was engaging in behavior that was like, you cannot be looking at that document that you're looking at and making a decision. And it can be very awkward to figure out how to confront that judge. And Kevin has great relationships with the judges, but I remember him telling a story of he took back in chambers, hey, judge, can we chat in chambers? And he went and he had that conversation, and the judge was really receptive to it. And I think having that model and knowing Kevin did that and having somebody and hearing that conversation, and this is a way that you can approach judges and see them, and they will be very human with you in chambers. But it's hard. It's hard to take that first step, and when we don't talk about how we confront these biases and how we deal with these situations, if we don't have that model, it's hard to invent it on our own and create our own roadmap, especially the younger we are. You know, Kevin's beloved in Gwinnett. Everybody adores Kevin. So then that gives him he has social capital to go have that conversation, which we don't all always have. But even him just being a model, even if I don't have that social capital, it helps me think I might be able to do that as well.
Well,
But I have to say, so with the federal judiciary, it's not the same as what
Right.
Judge Lopez was saying.
Right, you
calling
can't do
me and
that.
asking me to lunch.
Right.
Can't do that.
They don't,
Right.
It's sort of frowned on and kind of inappropriate unless
Right.
you've been friends for years before you ever became a judge. And
so I'm gonna go with relationships once again, because I'm gonna go through your question two ways. One, if you are a prosecutor in an office and you're having an issue with a judge, and I think anybody who's been a prosecutor in an office, you probably have had some type of issue with a judge. But if it's getting to the point where you're being demeaned by this judge and it's awful, right? I mean, I can't ever be held in contempt for what I say in my head, right? I've cursed out a lot of judges. But then you go to your higher up, like I was saying, like my boss is great. If there is an issue or something, he understands the leverage of power, and so he might go. They may not still do anything different, but there's a different aspect when your boss is the one dealing with And that's what their position is to do. They are the elected. They should be the one dealing with the judge if there's a true issue that's going to also affect the office as well. Relationships, okay, you say you're federal judges, and I'm not doing a plug or anything, but I think Christina Peterson's here. You see them in other contexts, right? Whether or not you are, I do the Atlanta Bar Show. Christina's been in the Atlanta Bar Show. We have lots of people in that show. You have judges from the Court of Appeals, judges from the Supreme Court, you have judges from the federal court who participate in that. And I'm not saying that you're going to go and talk to them about substantive issues, but you make relationships with them so that if you have an issue that comes up with how a judge is treating you, maybe you can ask for their perspective. Maybe they can give you some ideas of how to deal with that. Who knows what conversations they may have based off of what you have said, your interactions with one of their colleagues when they're having lunch with their colleague that they wouldn't have with you. And so I think I have found that to be very invaluable. You meet people that you may not normally see on a day-to-day basis, but because you've met them, they may meet somebody or talk to somebody else that you may need at some point in time. And so that's what I would say. I really do think that a lot of law and just a lot of life is about relationships and politicking. I hate to say politicking, but you know what I mean, networking, right? And the legal community is a very small community. You don't realize how small it is. It's like 6 degrees of separation from this person who knows this person is. Like I was just speaking with Lauren. Oh, your husband is Carter Clayton. Oh, I know Carter. I've worked with Carter before. His wife was his mother, a judge on the state court in Cobb County, was in the bar show, right? You may not ever see this person working around them, but you were doing some other type of event and you've made some type of relationship with them. And so that's how I would say it. That would be my thoughts on that.
I think it's also a good plug for our partner organizations, which is GABWA and GAL and GHBA and AVLF is here. And I had never understood networking. I was at a small law firm. We didn't do any of it. I didn't have any role model for it. But when we join those organizations, we talk about why can't all women be allies? That is one way we really can ally with each other. And we see each other. Lawyers love to have this I'm a lawyer and I'm in my lawyer clothes, but when we hang out on the weekends and do a community service project together, we're just people. And that connection really that is how we get past these biases, and that is how we make those relationships and get ahead. So that's not the solution, the grand solution, but it is something to keep in mind, that being engaged in those and forming those communities outside of the practice of law, but with that commonality really helps.
I was just curious, Erin, since you're the one who told the story, do you know how the guy stood up for the younger associate, like what he did?
I think he tried to stand up. I think it ended in the conversation that he felt, the gentleman felt like, well, I'm not sure what to do. You know, this great New York accent that I'm not going to try to imitate. He's like, I don't know what to do. And I'll just share, my takeaway was always be an ally, right? Like that was my regret on the plane, is like I didn't know in the moment how to be an ally. And my takeaway and the way that I'm moving forward from Friday is any opportunity that I see, fine, maybe that person will feel like I don't need your rescue, but at the end of the day, I'll feel better if I know that I spoke out, because I don't know how else we affect change. Really, I don't know how else we do it if we don't start calling it out when we see it, and it can't be on the burden of the person who's receiving it. That's how we've always existed, and that's not working. So, that's my take. And yes.
I'm sorry. I want to go back to what this gentleman was talking about, and we talked about it earlier. Judge Lopez spoke about you having to work hard to get where you need to be, but then there was also a conversation about the women-only firms and how they might be not viewed as helping the general society. And there was also talk about women who work hard that are considered bitchy. So I'm hearing a lot of contradictions here today, because honestly, in my view of things, if a woman in the workplace generally has issues with maybe gender bias and maybe racial bias, and that prohibits you do have a glass ceiling sometimes. And as Judge Lopez also stated, in his workplace and his environment, he was limited. When his people were gone, he had no opportunity for progress at that point. He had no opportunity to grow. So he had to find somewhere else to go. Well, I'm seeing it in the legal community where a woman that works hard, that might be considered bitchy, and because she's confident in her work and she knows what she can do and she knows her worth. And she's not going to be associated and sit under the Me Too movement and do certain things to get where she needs to be. So then she starts her own practice. And starting her own practice, she might hire other women, like-minded women. She might be open to hiring men, but a lot of them don't want to be under a woman. So I don't understand. I felt like what I heard it was a negative connotation of this woman, this full woman law firm, but I'm saying it seems as if in the current general society, if she doesn't make her own way, then there's really not much way. So what do we say in that instance?
So repeating the question, which, so if I get it wrong, let me know, but given the conversation that we had earlier today, several conversations, this notion of whether or not women-only or minority-only firms, I don't want to say only, women-owned, minority-owned, where we're trying to create an environment where previously marginalized people have an opportunity to succeed is a good thing or a bad thing, which is what we kind of, and I'm, to be fair, the one who said, asking Falguni from a societal standpoint, and we were just having this conversation, Elaine and Cheryl and I and some others in the break. I don't doubt for 1 minute that women-owned, minority-owned environments are fabulous, and I'm sorry I was never in one, to be honest. Okay? My question wasn't that they're not good places to be, good places to work, ways to gain leadership qualities at all. My question was in the larger perspective, and I don't know the answer to this. And I think it is a question for us as a society. If that's the only way that women or otherwise marginalized people can succeed, what the hell does that say about us as a society? And is that where we want to be? Now, my own view is we need to have all different kinds of environment. You know, diversity, big D sense, is good everywhere, right? My only point for asking that question was from a societal standpoint, if we're creating a world where that's the only way, or one of the only ways, or even the best way, whatever best means, to be successful, is that what we want? That was the only reason I raised that point.
And I get your point on that, and I guess that the thing that I'd say on that too is that, I don't know, sometimes I draw comparisons to other things outside of law. What I think when you said what you were saying earlier, Elizabeth, it goes kind of to like going to pop culture. So the Oscars talked about earlier this year, they've expanded and they have like 10 categories of what's best film. And they talked about what they called a way to give other films opportunities. And so they talked about doing something, a popular film category. And so the question became, and they said that that would be a way for a movie such as Black Panther, which was an excellent movie for all the different aspects, maybe that would be a way for it to get consideration. And so that people started saying, well, if you take it out of what has been normally considered to be the best picture category, and you're now segregating it to this popular category, and you're not evaluating it on that same level, are you diminishing it because now it's no longer a part of this esteemed level, and you've put it over here so that it can never be considered in that area? And I think that's kind of along the lines of what you're saying, which is that if you have an all-female firm because you feel that's the only way that you get your progress, does that mean that the firms that can have this type of diversity, which with regard to gender, no longer have a responsibility necessarily to do it? Because it's over here and there's no impact on them here. Now, how we answer that, I'm not quite sure. But maybe it's because you've got a phenomenal female firm that is doing fantastic, and now this big firm sees this and they want to poach some of the people over here, and it's because they don't have these people here that they've got to figure out a way that they retain those people. I'm not quite sure how we do that, but I think that's part of the dialogue. But I think we can have, I think even though it's here's the reality. It's just like anything in life, like you're talking about politics, anything, right? The overarching thing is change should happen, and it should be this way. But until it is that way, you've got to figure out a way that you progress until that time happens. And at the same time as you are progressing, you figure out a way to help change the inside. And I think that's just a dialogue. I don't think there's going to be an answer to that. It's 2018, right? And we talk about when women first had the right to vote. Last year it was, 100 years here in the state of Georgia? And we're still talking, for women, and we're still talking about women.
White women, that's right.
Yeah.
White women, exactly. White women, right, exactly. And we're still talking about how one changes perceptions of women in the workplace, let alone race issues.
Right, and I will say, I have a prime example, and I know she's not here, but she's a very dear friend, Jamala McFadden.
Yes.
That's exactly what she did.
Yes.
She left Sutherland. She started her own firm. It's now known as the Employment Law Solution. I want to say they fluctuated, but I think they're maybe at about 5 or 6 lawyers. They're in Cobb County, in the Cobb County area. She's got the pedigree, Michigan law or Michigan state law, whatever it is. She does work for large Fortune 50 organizations. I know for a fact there are folks at large majority firms that would love to poach her. And so I don't know that it's, quote, a bad thing. I think it's more to your question, a question about our broader society, about our broader legal society, our legal environment, whether she had to actually go through those steps to get the type of work that she's getting. But she's doing it, and she's doing it successfully. And so I think, to LaTanya's point, she has raised visibility in those larger law firms about the expertise, the excellence, and the type of work that she can do. And it's unfortunate for the firm that she left that she had to do that in an environment that she created. It's amazing for her and her colleagues, but it's unfortunate for that firm.
I mean, I also think in terms of change, just one quick response here. So this was really an illuminating exchange, but it seems to me that when we're talking about making change, there's 4 potential audiences, right? Maybe that's not the right word, but in terms of strategy for structural change, and I mean social change. So one is folks who are already woke and in positions of power, and I mean really woke, not just people who think they're woke. 2, folks who were kind of woke or want to be woke, but aren't quite sure what that means. 3, folks who will be woke if it's convenient, which sounds like what we're talking about. And then 4, folks who don't care. So the question is, who are you pitching that change toward? And it sounds to me that at least there's 3 potential audiences, so you have to kind of know what the strategy is if we're talking not just individual change, but social and structural change. So how are you going to pitch it in that case? And what you two were talking about, and I think what you two were also talking about, was the middle 2 groups, right? Folks who want to be woke and those for whom it might be convenient to at least be part of that conversation, even if they don't necessarily want to be.
Last question. Yes, ma'am.
I think the gentleman had a question too.
We'll do 2 questions. We'll do 2 last questions. And Candace is going to say, yeah.
business ethic on a money learning same playing field. So I'm not trying to change
I guess for me, just so that I understand, when you say succeed, I don't want to assume that success to you said you want the same access, and what is succeed? Getting the same or similar matters as a larger non-majority firm or a larger majority firm? I want to understand your question before I attempt to perhaps provide some. Yeah, I think so. Correct me if I'm wrong. If I understand your question, I don't know that that's possible. I mean, to the question that was answered earlier with respect to resources, it would. And I think you said, are you a solo?
Yes.
Okay. I would be even not bet the firm litigation, but kind of steps down from bet the firm litigation. From my perspective as an in-house attorney, if you're going for corporate type matters versus individual like litigant matters, I really think it's a matter of, does this firm, whether it's 1, 20, or 200, have not only the expertise but the resources to manage this matter? And I don't know that you potentially could be looked at in parity if you are a solo versus maybe even a 20-person firm, because you don't have as much bandwidth. And I guess it's a matter of whether that bandwidth is needed for that particular matter. That's why I wanted to be certain that I understood your question. I don't want to sound negative, but I don't know that you could be looked at from I don't know that you could be in the same playing field, because it's a matter of resources. It's a matter of structure and support. Can you handle that matter?
Right, so that may be the case for litigation. I don't think litigation.
Okay.
But I understand what you're saying. I guess from my perspective, we're looking at whether or not women-owned law firms is a bad or good or bad thing when it comes to if that is a way for women to find success in legal fields if they can't find it in a larger law firm. My question is, I guess my question or my thought is, I don't see it as a negative thing. It can be 5 women, and it can be, 12 women, or 12 women and minorities. The issue is not whether or not they want to go out on their own. The issue is how can they have the same access to the same resources, the same clientele. I get that in some instances that
There is one example.
as far as if you have the same bandwidth. I totally understand that. But I mean on the instances where that's not the case.
Sure. I will say that there's one example. So, taking it, and I'm a corporate lawyer as well, so transactional, so I understand where you're coming from outside of the context of litigation. So there's the Patrick Law Group. Liz Patrick is the Patrick Law Group is a woman-owned firm. I want to say maybe they have 5 or 6 lawyers. They're transactional work, and they absolutely do work for Cox. So yes, they're getting work from Cox at the same time that Jones Day and all these other people are. So to me, that sounds like an example of, at least from my perspective that I know about, there you have kind of parity, if you will. You're on the same playing field, and I think that came about as a result of the fact that Liz has a tremendous network. She's engaged in NamWolf. You would swear that I'm like putting out ads for NamWolf, but I have seen people get work out of NamWolf and it be a differentiator in the success of their firms. And I just also think it's some of the things that Erin made reference to, her engagement outside of substantive areas of the law, as far as the boards that she sits on, the community engagement that she does, such that she is being put in these places where she's sitting next to a Jen Hightower, who is the GC of Cox Communications. Beyond that, I couldn't say specifically, but what I could suggest, I'd be happy to introduce you to Liz, and I think Liz is the type of woman that would be ready and willing to have a conversation with you. She wouldn't see a conversation with you as being competitive. She would see, oh, okay, here is a woman that is like-minded, that determined the best place for her was not in environment A, not environment B, but to create environment C. not out of necessity, but that's just where she wanted to be, and how she marketed her firm, because I don't even think it's been around very long, less than 10 years. That's because I've never been specifically in that environment, but I see her firm as an example. That would be my best guidance to you there.
Networking.
Yeah, and I'll just say on that networking thing, one quick thing. If he was here, I would tell him this, because I just thought about this. Judge Lopez, I met him through doing the show, the bar show. I would never see him any other time.
Right.
I would have never seen him any other time but for doing that bar show. And I feel comfortable from the time of working around with him that if something were to come up or something, I could speak with him. And so just going back to you, what you were saying about relationships, you're willing to introduce her to somebody to talk to or whatever. I think it is I do not believe that you can ever get your name out there or be a part of the conversation if no one ever sees you. And so just going back to, you can do the best work in the whole entire world, but I guarantee you can look in your organization, you can look around, and you can see people who have not maybe done as well of work as you have, but you see them out in better position. And it's because they're not afraid to get out there and make themselves known as well. So I think, I don't want to say it's all one thing or another. I think it's a combination of things. That's it.
And it's difficult, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I'm not in that role, but it's difficult trying to manage your practice, all the things that come along with it, not just practicing law, but if you have an admin, the payroll, the all of the rest. But, there would, in my opinion, there would need to be some engagement potentially outside, and maybe it's not participation in the bar chore or member of GABWA, but maybe it's just a lunch here and there, making that a part of your marketing plan. I think the gentleman had a question.
Did one of the, who was raising their hand beforehand, and we were like, oh, who's gonna get it? Anthony, you're up.
Okay, it's just a comment, and when I look at this situation, I see once again so many similarities to the civil rights movement, and if we look at that situation, we analyze it, there was not one right or wrong way to approach the issue. You had to have the Black Panthers, you had to have the Nation of Islam, you had to have Martin Luther King, you had to have SCLC. All had different strategies in approaching the same issue. And I think that this particular situation, the same type of strategy happened. An independent firm has to identify exactly what, and I'm once again, I'm not trying to tell attorneys how to run it. I'm just thinking about it from a strictly business perspective. I would think that I would need to identify the specific markets that I would want to target. I would think about the resources that I have available, and taking those two matters into consideration, approach my target. Goes back to the all-women firm, the empowerment piece that I was speaking about earlier. If, as a solo, I don't have as much power, but if I congregate with other attorneys, then I may have more leverage. Now, in accomplishing maybe several successes as a firm, an all-female firm, what that does is it starts to change the mentality of those people in positions of power that are in corporate. And that then impacts the relationships that they have influences over. So I think that personally, it needs to be a multi-pronged approach. I don't think it needs to be one or the other. I think all fronts need to be attacked because, once again, it is a very societal issue. And there are going to be different needs, there are going to be different desires as far as results are concerned. But what we want to do is we want to change the overall impression of society. And that's the only way I can think of that it's going to be approached. It's not going to happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight with the civil rights movement. It's still going on today. There are many underlying things that are not spoken in our societies. We see these things happening, right, whether Republican or Democrat. A lot of the dirty laundry of this country is coming out now as a result of our current political state. So I said all that to say, I would encourage, having had 3 businesses of my own, all minority owned, all minority workers, everyone that worked for me looked like me. We did eventually get the opportunity to work with larger firms and larger contracts. But there has to be an overarching legal environment that's going to be conducive to that. I don't know what that looks like in the Bar Association, if that's handled on the federal level or if it's handled on the state level or whatever. But there has to be a stamp, a legal stamp of this is what we want to do, this is what we want to see from some authority to give the okay.
That's right. And unless we're as usual out of time, so that's a good place to close. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you first of all to our amazing panelists for taking so much time out of their day. And of course to my co-chair, Candace Rodgers, and to Angela King, who is also maybe hiding somewhere. But really, I encourage you, let's start having more of these conversations, because we need to start solving these problems. And, this conversation isn't always the only solution, but, it's on the path to getting us there. So take these conversations home. Feel comfortable, be bold, be brave, have these uncomfortable conversations with people who we wouldn't normally have them with, because that's how we learn.
Be an ally.
Be an ally.
And stop by the ABLF table on your way out to find out great opportunities to do excellent pro bono work.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And thank you to Gabwa, Gall, and GPABA, and GHBA. You guys are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, one photo up.
Oh.